Amidst the vast, endless void, space storms occasionally raged, with meteors streaking across the sky, causing booming sounds that reverberated throughout the world. Whoosh! In the boundless expanse, a streak of light suddenly flashed by. Within that light, a young figure appeared, weary and worn. His eyes continuously scanned the surroundings, as if searching for something. The dimensional passage from the White Dragon Supreme's lower dimension should be roughly in this direction, the young figure muttered to himself. From time to time, he glanced down at the back of his hand, where a white dragon mark glowed with a soft, ethereal light. This figure was none other than Chen. Since leaving the Northern Domain, he had been traveling alone for a full 3 months. During these 3 months, he never once stopped, following the guidance of the dragon symbol, constantly heading southwest across the Great Thousand Worlds. Along the way, he passed countless continents, large and small. The journey was grueling, but after 3 months of relentless travel, he finally reached the southwestern region of the Great Thousand Worlds. According to the guidance of the dragon symbol, the spatial node for the White Dragon Supreme's lower dimension should be within this area. However, finding it wouldn't be easy. Although the Great Thousand Worlds connected countless lower dimensions, entering one required locating a spatial node. These nodes, before being activated, could be as small as dust and nearly impossible to detect. Thus, finding such a node in the vast expanse was no simple task. Nevertheless, after 3 months of travel, Chen's mindset had become calm. Since he had already made up his mind to tread the path of the Heavenly Supreme, all he had to do was give his all. He glanced around, then closed his eyes slightly. A tremendous surge of spiritual energy erupted from his body, flowing like a tidal wave, spreading through the void. As the spiritual energy expanded, Chen's senses began to probe inch by inch through the void. He knew this would be a long process, but he remained patient, moving like a wandering monk, taking each step slowly in the vast world. Time passed quietly as Chen continued his search. Unknowingly, a month had passed. Chen had no idea how far he had searched, but he knew that each probe ended when his spiritual energy was depleted. At that point, he would meditate, recovering his energy before resuming the search. This cycle repeated again and again. A month had passed with no results, yet Chen did not give up. He continued expanding his search. Another month passed. In the emptiness, Chen opened his eyes. His youthful, handsome face was now marked with signs of exhaustion. This intense search, even for someone at the great perfection level, was taking its toll. He looked up. His spiritual energy had spread nearly 100 miles, but there was still no sign of any anomaly. Clearly, his probe had yielded no results once again. My spiritual energy is about to run out, Chen muttered, his brow furrowing. A flicker of disappointment crossed his eyes. Over these 2 months of searching, he had encountered too many disappointments. If not for his unwavering will, he would have likely given up by now. Could it be that the guidance was wrong, or has that lower dimension been destroyed? Chen looked down at the dragon symbol on the back of his hand, his lips pressed tight. If that were the case, all his efforts over the past 6 months would have been in vain. Whatever happens, I cannot give up halfway. With a firm resolve, Chen gritted his teeth, reaffirming his determination. He focused his mind, preparing to retract his weakening spiritual energy and take a short rest before continuing his search. However, just as Chen was pulling back his spiritual energy like retreating waves, his expression suddenly tightened. In that instant, he faintly sensed a slight disturbance in the space to the west. The disturbance was extremely subtle. Had Chen not been so attuned to his surroundings after such a long time, he might have easily missed it. With a swift movement, he vanished from his location. Moments later, he reappeared at the place where the disturbance had originated, 100 miles away. His gaze fixed on the void ahead, and his spiritual energy spread inch by inch, probing the space. The spiritual energy carefully spread out. After a while, Chen's pupils suddenly contracted, and his hands swiftly formed a seal. The spiritual energy, moving with incredible speed, began to converge toward a single point. Buzz! The spiritual energy transformed into a glowing ring. Chen's gaze locked onto the very center of the ring, where, amidst the swirling spiritual light, a black, no larger than a speck of dust, flickered into view, faintly discernible. A strange spatial fluctuation radiated from the black dot. Chen stared at the black dot, his face unable to hide the overwhelming joy that surged within him. This was the spatial node he had been desperately searching for over the past 2 months. By opening this spatial node, he would be able to enter the realm of the White Dragon Supreme. Finally, I found it. Chen let out a long sigh of relief, but he didn't immediately open the spatial node. Instead, he sat down cross-legged, waving his sleeve. A large quantity of supreme spiritual liquid erupted, swiftly replenishing his spiritual energy. Although it was only a lower dimension, it had already been occupied by the extraterritorial evil clan. To enter, he needed to ensure that he was in peak condition at all times. While his spiritual energy rapidly recovered, Chen kept his vigilance, continuously scanning his surroundings in case anyone else stumbled upon this spatial node. For the people of the Great Thousand Worlds, these lower dimensions were often places of great opportunity, and they were particularly attractive because they were naturally weaker than the Great Thousand Worlds. If one could enter a lower dimension, they would enjoy an overwhelming sense of invincibility, gaining access to various resources. However, the people of the Great Thousand Worlds had a hard time entering these lower dimensions, even if they found a spatial node. This was due to the dimensional laws. One would need a native item from that dimension as a guide to enter. For example, the White Dragon Spirit Pearl Chen held bore the mark of the White Dragon Supreme, which acted as a key to bypass the dimensional rules and enter the lower dimension. Of course, nothing was absolute. There were always methods to secretly infiltrate a lower dimension. This was why Chen didn't want anyone else to discover the spatial node he had so arduously found. If someone did, trouble would likely follow. As Chen maintained his guard, about an hour passed. His spiritual energy was nearly restored, and his eyes shimmered with radiant light. Feeling his energy fully replenished, Chen sighed in relief, then stood up and focused on the black spatial node. This time, he didn't hesitate. With a snap of his fingers, vast spiritual energy surged out, crashing into the spatial node. Buzz! The spatial node behaved like a black hole, voraciously devouring the spiritual energy. As it consumed the energy, the speck of black light gradually expanded. A few minutes later, the tiny black speck transformed into a black hole about 10 feet wide, emitting violent spatial fluctuations. Chen looked at the spatial black hole in front of him. He threw a punch at it, only to have his fist rebound with tremendous force, causing a faint pain in his hand. As expected, it's difficult for people from the Great Thousand Worlds to enter a lower dimension. Chen sighed, then clenched his fist. The White Dragon Spirit Pearl appeared, and he infused it with spiritual energy. The pearl radiated a soft white light that enveloped his body. Chen took a deep breath, his expression growing serious. He remained silent for a few moments. Then, with a determined look, he stepped forward and kicked into the spatial black hole. I hope I can find my path of the Heavenly Supreme here. The white light pierced through the black hole. This time, there was no resistance, and Chen stepped through effortlessly, disappearing from view. As soon as Chen's body vanished into the black hole trembled slightly before rapidly shrinking, eventually dissipating into dust, hidden once again in the vast void. The void returned to its eerie silence. The vast heavens and earth were shrouded in a dark red hue. Even the land and distant mountains appeared to be tinted with a faint red color. From a distance, it looked as though they had been tainted by endless blood, filled with a chilling and tragic atmosphere. Buzz! On top of a mountain peak, the space suddenly tore apart, and a dimensional passage took shape. A tall, slender figure was seen descending from within. This figure was naturally Chen, who had passed through the dimensional passage and arrived here. As his figure landed, and he noticed that there were no immediate disturbances around him, Chen's tense body finally relaxed a bit, and the spiritual energy surrounding him also began to settle down. The level of the celestial power in this lower dimension is indeed quite low, Chen remarked, stretching out his palm. The surrounding energy gathered, forming a light sphere. He could feel the energy within, but his brows furrowed slightly. The celestial power here was nowhere near as refined as the spiritual energy of the Great Thousand Worlds, So if he wanted to recover his strength here, it would be much slower. Fortunately, I brought the supreme spiritual liquid from the Mu Manor's reserves. Mu Chen sighed. Without the supreme spiritual liquid as a backup, even if he encountered a battle later, he would have been somewhat handicapped, always worrying about running out of spiritual energy. Even so, he still had to be cautious, ensuring that his spiritual energy didn't deplete completely and put him in a dangerous position. After reflecting for a moment, Mu Chen suddenly clenched his hand, and the white dragon spirit pearl flashed into his palm. As soon as it appeared, the white light on it seemed to surge slightly. However, to Mu Chen's surprise, the mark left by the white dragon venerable still hadn't been activated. Could it be that I need to reach the white dragon venerable's homeland to trigger that lingering will? Mu Chen pondered aloud. But no matter what, he would have to try. The good news was that the white dragon spirit pearl reacted to this lower dimension, meaning he hadn't come to the wrong place. This lower dimension should be occupied by the so-called Blood Fiend clan. Mu Chen stared at the dark red sky. In this world, he could sense faint, bloodthirsty, and cold fluctuations. His spiritual energy seemed extremely repelled by these waves, which clearly came from the Blood Fiend clan. It seemed that these extraterritorial evil clans were attempting to alter this lower dimension, trying to corrupt the celestial power here into the kind they needed. I wonder how strong the Blood Fiend clan is, Mu Chen muttered. With the enemy's situation unclear, he couldn't afford to act recklessly. At the very least, he needed to find out whether there was a demon emperor among the Blood Fiend clan that occupied this lower dimension. Every demon emperor possessed combat abilities on par with the Heavenly Supreme, and if one was truly here, that would not be good news for him. Given his current strength, he wouldn't be confident in facing a demon emperor. I'll investigate this information first. Making up his mind, Mu Chen wasted no time. His figure moved like a stream of light, shooting toward the distance. To avoid drawing attention, he kept low, avoiding detection by the Blood Fiend clan. As he moved at full speed, countless mountains were left behind. But the further he went, the tighter his brows became. He realized that there wasn't a single sound of birds or beasts in this world. It was eerily silent, like a world of the dead. Has every living being in this world been slaughtered by the Blood Fiend clan? Mu Chen's expression darkened. These damned extraterritorial evil clans were so ruthless? His mind raced, and Mu Chen quickly spread his senses. Fortunately, after half an hour, he finally detected some fluctuations. Mu Chen's figure appeared on the peak of a mountain, his gaze scanning the distance. There, on the land, the faint outline of a city could be seen. Mu Chen focused on the city. He could sense that there were many presences within. Some of them carried the same aura as this world, which, if he wasn't mistaken, were the native inhabitants of this dimension. Are there still native inhabitants here? Mu Chen's eyes flashed. His figure moved like a ghost, appearing above the city in an instant. He retracted his spiritual energy, blending into the void so that no one could detect his presence. Hovering above the city, Mu Chen's gaze swept over the scene below. What greeted his eyes was a picture of prosperity, with countless people bustling through the streets in the midst of a lively urban landscape. However, as he observed this vibrant scene, his brow furrowed. From the chaotic energy of the crowd, he could sense something strange. The people, though displaying all kinds of emotions, were all pale, their faces twisted into expressions that concealed a deep numbness. These people, despite being alive, appeared more like walking corpses. Suddenly, as Mu Chen pondered this eerie sensation, a sharp, high-pitched wail echoed through the city, reverberating across the sky. Boom! The moment the shrill sound rang out, the bustling city was thrown into chaos. People turned and ran in all directions, heading frantically toward their homes. The smiles that had once adorned their faces disappeared, replaced by an overwhelming expression of fear. Ha ha ha. At that very moment, countless blood shadows shot out from the city's depths, accompanied by piercing laughter. Like hawks descending from the sky, they pounced on the fleeing masses below. From high above, Mu Chen's eyes narrowed. He could see that the blood shadows were clothed in crimson robes, their faces pale, with sharp fangs jutting from their mouths, gleaming coldly. These were undoubtedly the so-called blood fiends. They dove down, extending their hands to snatch the fleeing people. With a sudden leap, they ascended into the air, their fangs sinking into the victims' necks. In mere moments, the life was drained from their bodies, leaving them to wither and struggle briefly before being discarded carelessly, like trash. In just a few minutes, what had once been a bustling and peaceful city had turned into a scene of carnage, with corpses strewn everywhere and the air thick with the stench of blood. High above, Chen finally snapped back to his senses, his face turning ashen. He now understood what was happening. The blood fiends had intentionally gathered the native inhabitants here, treating them like livestock, waiting for the right moment to slaughter them. They reveled in the panic and desperation as their prey fled in terror. The native inhabitants of this world had survived, but they were being bred as food. Such cruelty and savagery. A blood shadow descended from the sky, seizing a young girl who was desperately trying to flee. The shadow's cold hand brushed against her delicate cheek, which was now marked by despair. She struggled violently, but could not break free from the grasp of the blood fiend. The creature extended its tongue, licking the girl's pale neck as it inhaled the scent of her fresh blood, grinning broadly. Still a virgin? I'm really lucky today. With that, it drove its sharp fangs toward her throat, eager to indulge in her virgin blood. Just as the fangs were about to sink into her flesh, a sudden stillness overcame the creature. It was as if an invisible force had gripped its head, making it unable to move. The blood fiend froze, looking over its shoulder in shock. There, standing behind it, was a young man. His expression was cold, and his voice thundered. "Who are you? How dare you interrupt my meal?" Boom. The response came in the form of a crushing grip. In an instant, the blood fiend's head exploded, and blood splattered across the girl's face. The abrupt turn of events startled the girl, leaving her stunned. She stared at the disintegrating body of the blood fiend, her face still covered in blood, too shocked to wipe it away. However, she quickly regained her senses, but there was no relief or joy in her eyes. Instead, they were filled with even more despair. She looked at Chen, trembling, and whispered, "Run. You have to leave." In the past, there had been others who tried to resist these demons. But in the end, not only were they torn apart, but anyone nearby was also punished. Their lives became a living hell. So, in her eyes, there was no hope for survival for them now. At that moment, other blood fiends had noticed the situation. A furious scream filled the air, and in the blink of an eye, countless blood shadows shot down from the sky, charging toward Chen as if they were intent on tearing him to pieces. The panicked native inhabitants, still fleeing, watched the scene unfold, trembling uncontrollably. They were numb, fully aware that once the blood fiends finished shredding anyone who dared resist, they would be next. None would survive. However, it's better this way. Living a life worse than death, it would be more merciful to just die. Swish, swish. Above the city, countless blood shadows howled as they swooped down. In the midst of those numb gazes, they charged straight at Chen. Chen, however, paid no attention to the blood shadows. Instead, he reached out his hand and gently wiped the blood from the young girl's cheek. A gentle smile appeared on his handsome face as he said, "Don't worry, it's all right now." As he spoke, he finally lifted his head and looked at the bloodthirsty blood shadows shooting down from the sky. His expression gradually turned cold, and a cold light gathered in his jet-black eyes. Slowly, he lifted his foot and suddenly stomped down. Boom. A storm of spiritual energy erupted from him as the epicenter, wreaking havoc across the sky and the earth. Bang, bang, bang. The spiritual energy storm howled as it passed. The thousands of blood shadows charging toward him suddenly froze. The next moment, they let out terrifying, shrill screams, but as soon as the sound spread, their bodies exploded under the overwhelming force of the spiritual energy, bursting into a mist of blood. Within mere seconds, all the blood shadows in the sky were wiped out. The city, which had been filled with the sounds of piercing screams, fell into a sudden, eerie silence. The native inhabitants in the city, who had been waiting for death, stared blankly at this scene, unable to comprehend. They never imagined that those demons, whom they had once thought invincible, would be wiped out so effortlessly, as if they were nothing more than flies, just with a single stomp from the figure before them. They stiffly turned their heads and looked at the tall, slender youth standing in the midst of the falling blood mist, his expression calm and his body graceful. Their bodies began to tremble uncontrollably. The young girl in front of Chen, trembling, stared at this scene, and the next moment, she suddenly dropped to her knees before him, her body shaking violently. At the same time, her hoarse, heart-wrenching voice rang out. "Celestial Lord, please save us." In her eyes, the only one who could so easily slay these powerful demons was none other than the legendary Celestial Lord. The young girl's desperate cries echoed through the city, the despair in her voice so piercing that it sent shivers down anyone's spine. At this moment, the other native inhabitants in the city, upon hearing her cries, finally snapped out of their stupor. They all knelt in unison toward Chen, trembling, their posture desperate, as if they had seized their last hope. "Celestial Lord, please save us." The voices rose and fell, one after another. On their faces, despair was deeply etched. Living a life as if they were nothing more than livestock, they had lost all dignity. Worse still, they didn't even have the right to die. Their sole purpose for survival seemed to be providing an endless supply of blood to the demonic Blood Fiend clan. Of course, they were allowed to bear children, but their offspring would be raised in the same way, like livestock, to be farmed and exploited, the cycle repeating forever. They had thought about rebelling, but in the face of such overwhelming power, their resistance was nothing more than the struggles of ants, little more than a source of amusement for the demons, achieving nothing. The demons were invincible, but now, before them, suddenly appeared a mysterious and powerful figure. They didn't know if this youth was from their own tribe, but at least, the person before them didn't carry that bloodthirsty aura. Perhaps, just perhaps, their fate could be changed by this mysterious youth. Thinking this, the countless native inhabitants in the city began to fervently knock their heads against the ground, not caring for the blood streaming down their foreheads. The pain was nothing compared to the shame of being raised like animals. Chen, watching this scene, sighed inwardly. At this moment, he finally understood why, when facing the invasion of the extraterritorial evil clan, all beings in the Great Thousand Worlds would set aside their grudges and unite. Because once the extraterritorial evil clan truly occupied the Great Thousand Worlds, all living beings would be enslaved, just like the native inhabitants of this lower dimension, no better than livestock. The extraterritorial evil clan was an enemy that could not coexist with the world. Chen waved his sleeve, and a gentle force swept out, lifting the kneeling inhabitants to their feet. His gaze swept over them, meeting the trembling eyes, and he nodded slightly. "Don't worry. I will save you all from here. These lower dimensions are all part of the Great Thousand Worlds. Although they are at a lower tier compared to the Great Thousand Worlds, they are still considered a part of it. Within the Great Thousand Worlds, few people hold any prejudice against the lower dimensions. The reason is simple. Although these lower dimensions are of a lower tier, if a prodigy emerges who can break the shackles of their dimension and reach the Great Thousand Worlds, they are bound to become a true hero, with achievements that are limitless in the future. Like the Flame Emperor, like the Martial Ancestor. Therefore, as a fellow person of the Great Thousand Worlds, Chen, though not a saint, would not stand idly by while the Blood Fiend clan treats these people as livestock to be slaughtered. "Thank you, Celestial Lord." The young girl before him was crying, her face covered in tears. Everyone else was so excited they almost fell to their knees, but a gentle force held them up, preventing them from kneeling. "It seems there's still something in there." Chen's gaze shifted toward the deepest part of the city, and he casually asked the girl in front of him, "What's that?" In his perception, there was a faint yet powerful aura deep within the city. However, it seemed to be in a deep slumber. Upon hearing Chen's question, the girl's face turned pale, and her voice trembled with fear. "Celestial Lord, that's the Blood Demon General. His strength is terrifying, but he is currently sleeping. We must leave quickly before he wakes up." They all feared the Blood Demon General to the utmost because every time he awakened, he would drink the blood of thousands of people, mercilessly brutal. The Blood Demon General, huh? Chen pondered for a moment, then smiled. Suddenly, his hand clenched, and a massive sphere of spiritual energy, 100 feet in diameter, materialized in his palm. With a swift motion, he hurled it deep into the city amidst countless terrified gazes. Boom! The spiritual energy sphere exploded, leveling countless buildings in the city. In the next instant, a crimson beam of light shot into the sky, and a low, murderous growl echoed through the air. Who dares disturb my slumber? Upon hearing this growl, the native inhabitants of the city immediately collapsed in terror, their faces pale with fear. The most terrifying demon king in the city had awakened. We're all going to die. Some voices of despair rang out. In their eyes, the blood demon general's power was so overwhelming that, even though the mysterious celestial lord before them was powerful, they didn't believe he could defeat the blood demon general. Celestial lord, if things go wrong, please leave, the young girl said with a pale face. Seeing their fearful expressions, Chen couldn't help but shake his head with a smile. He had already sensed the blood demon general's strength, which seemed to be at the level of the perfect Earth Supreme in the Great Thousand Worlds. With such power, Chen could easily crush him with a single move. Where does the blood demon general stand in the Blood Fiend clan? Chen asked. The girl froze, then shook her head in confusion. To them, the blood demon general was like the king of demons, and they had never seen anyone stronger than him. Chen, seeing their ignorance, felt a bit disappointed. It seemed that their knowledge was very limited. Celestial Lord, we don't know much about the Blood Fiend clan's internal matters, but the queen surely knows, the girl said quickly, noticing Chen's disappointment. The queen? Chen was taken aback. What was that? These natives even had a queen? Before he could ask further, a crimson light suddenly shot down from the depths of the city, reaching the sky and transforming into a figure draped in a red robe. The figure's pale body was covered in blood-red markings, looking eerie and unnatural. Clearly, this was the blood demon general. After appearing, he saw the blood mist swirling in the air, and his expression changed. He shouted, "You dare kill my people? Who did this? Come out." His roar transformed into a shockwave that spread across the sky, causing countless native inhabitants to tremble with fear. Some blood-sucking pests, let them die? What's there to get worked up about? Chen raised his head at this moment, smiling at the blood demon general. Was it you? You're courting death. The blood demon general's eyes glowed with bloodlust as he stared viciously at Chen. In the next moment, a massive surge of bloodlight erupted from his body, and his figure split into multiple afterimages, streaking through the air, heading straight for Chen. Behind him, a terrifying blood sea raged, its momentum awe-inspiring. Chen gazed at the approaching sea of blood, shaking his head. In the next instant, his expression turned icy and fierce. His fingers clenched tightly, and with a simple, unremarkable punch, he struck forcefully. Boom! As the punch landed, a wave of crystal light spread from his fist, crashing directly into the oncoming sea of blood. Bang! The punch caused the space to tremble, the ground shattered, and the surging sea of blood exploded violently. Amidst the explosion, a piercing scream echoed, and then, the numerous native inhabitants present were horrified to see a disheveled blood shadow fly out of the shattered sea of blood. Boom! Boom! The blood shadow smashed through countless buildings, leaving a deep trench thousands of feet long on the ground, and was forcefully blasted out of the city. Chen watched the figure flying out and clenched his hand. With a surge of suction, the flying body was pulled back toward him and caught in his grasp. Looking down, Chen gazed at the twisted, cold corpse in his hand. The face of the blood demon general still held an expression of disbelief, and Chen couldn't help but twitch the corner of his mouth. He hadn't expected the blood demon general to be so weak. With just one punch, he had been killed on the spot. Pathetic. I was hoping to pry some information from you, Chen muttered, shaking his head in disdain, before casually tossing the corpse aside like trash. At that moment, the city fell into an eerie silence once again. The native inhabitants, who had been trembling in fear due to the appearance of the blood demon general, now stared with frozen expressions. They felt as though everything today had been a dream. Not only had the terrifying Blood Fiend clan demons been crushed like ants, but even the blood demon general, who resembled a demon king, had been blasted away with a single punch by this mysterious young man. Have we been tortured so badly that we're imagining things? One person muttered with a bitter laugh. Everything felt so unreal. They couldn't imagine that such a powerful person existed in this world. Celestial Lord. The delicate young woman looked at Chen with fervent admiration. Such strength. Could anyone other than the legendary Celestial Lord possess it? Had the Celestial Lord come to their rescue, seeing their despair? Let's go, Chen said with a faint smile, waving his hand toward the young woman and the others. Without waiting for them to respond, he moved swiftly and vanished from sight. The young woman and the native inhabitants panicked. However, Chen disappeared so quickly that they couldn't stop him. In the end, they exchanged looks and could only smile bitterly. All of them knelt down and bowed deeply toward the spot where Chen had disappeared. After a long pause, they slowly rose and began to flee the city in a frenzy. They knew that more Blood Fiend clan forces would soon arrive. If they didn't leave now, they would meet the same tragic end as before. As the native inhabitants fled, Chen appeared high in the sky, observing their retreating figures with a contemplative expression. What was this talk of a queen earlier? They seemed to know a lot about the Blood Fiend clan. In the worlds occupied by the Blood Fiend clan, do they still have forces gathering to resist? But their strength should be insufficient to counter the Blood Fiend clan. It looks like I need to follow them for a while. Through the dense mountain ranges, the figures of the fleeing people surged wildly, each face etched with fear. Every now and then, they glanced back, as if worried that demons might be chasing them. These people were the native inhabitants Chen had rescued from the city. After leaving the city, they had been racing desperately, fearing capture by the Blood Fiend clan. They didn't stop, even though some had fallen behind. The main group pressed on relentlessly. High above the panicked crowd, Chen stood in midair, his spiritual energy concealed, blending into the void. He watched the native inhabitants below, his eyes showing a hint of contemplation. From his time trailing them, he had noticed that these people seemed to have a clear objective. They appeared to know where they could find safety. Is it this so-called queen they've mentioned? Chen muttered to himself, feeling somewhat puzzled. Could it be that the power of the native inhabitants in this lower dimension was already sufficient to protect themselves? But he didn't think this possibility was very high. If it weren't for that, why else would these native inhabitants still be able to gather together under the rule of the Blood Fiend clan? Because of these thoughts, he didn't reveal himself. Instead, he chose to follow these people from the shadows, wanting to see for himself what this so-called queen was like. Of course, before understanding the true nature of their queen, Chen had no intention of engaging with them. He was venturing alone into the territory occupied by the Blood Fiend clan, so he had to be cautious. As these thoughts flashed through his mind, Chen once again lowered his head, his gaze focusing on the crowd below. The crowd, as if fleeing, continued their frantic journey. After 2 days, Chen finally felt their speed slowing down. At that moment, his gaze turned ahead, and his eyes couldn't help but narrow. Beyond the endless mountains, he saw towering cities. The cities were filled with the sounds of bustling activity. These cities were connected by high, imposing city walls, and from a distance, they looked like an enormous city-state. Chen quickly scanned the area, unable to see the end of this city-state. From his estimation, the number of native inhabitants within this city-state must be in the hundreds of millions. This left him somewhat shocked. How could the Blood Fiend clan allow such a large native inhabitant city-state to exist? As Chen was surprised, the people arriving at this place began to cheer in excitement, and they surged toward the city-state. When they neared the city, hundreds of figures flew out to block their way. Where do you come from? These figures, seemingly guards, shouted as they looked at the large group of approaching figures. We come from Iron Blood City. The young girl whom Chen had saved earlier stepped forward and shouted. Iron Blood City. The guards exchanged looks of surprise. There is a blood demon general stationed there. How did you manage to escape? The young girl excitedly replied. It was a celestial lord. He descended from the heavens, and all the Blood Fiend clan experts in Iron Blood City were wiped out by him with a single stroke. Even that blood demon general was killed with a single slap. All the guards were stunned, and then they simultaneously scolded. Nonsense. They knew all too well how terrifying the Blood Fiend clan was. That kind of strength was beyond what they could resist, and the blood demon general was even more fearsome. Yet, this girl claimed he was killed with a slap. How absurd. However, in the face of their angry reproaches, The other native inhabitants spoke up to confirm her story, their excited expressions surprising the guards. "Captain, could it be true what they are saying?" one guard whispered to the leader. The captain furrowed his brow. Although he found the story ridiculous, he couldn't ignore the collective protest from so many people. Could it really be true? If this is true, we must report it to the queen immediately. The captain's eyes shifted, and then he waved his hand. "Let them in." He then turned to the young girl. "Come with me. You'll meet the queen and tell her the truth about this matter." With that, he turned and walked away. At that moment, the city gates slowly began to open, and the crowd outside erupted in joyous cheers, as if they had just survived a calamity. At the center of the city stood a majestic palace. After the captain reported the incident, urgent bell chimes rang from within the palace. Inside a grand hall, the higher-ups of the city-state quickly gathered. Chen remained hidden in the void, his eyes scanning the hall. He was somewhat surprised, for he noticed that the people inside the hall were all radiating significant power. Of course, this significant power was relative to the native inhabitants he had encountered before. However, there were several individuals whose strength appeared to be extraordinarily formidable. From Chen's estimation, their power seemed to approach that of the Blood Demon General. If this were in the Great Thousand Worlds, these individuals would be considered top-tier Upper Earth Supremes. But as Chen carefully sensed, he discovered that these few people were emitting a faint, cold aura. That aura was something he was familiar with. It belonged to the Blood Fiend clan. The power of the Blood Fiend clan is mixed within her. Chen narrowed his eyes slightly. It seemed that this city-state, though seemingly independent, was still under the watchful eyes of the Blood Fiend clan. Long live the queen. As Chen scanned the high-level forces within the city-state, a voice rang out from the grand hall. Inside, everyone kneeled on one knee in respect. Through Chen's perception, a graceful figure in a white dress slowly walked out from the inner chamber of the hall. What surprised him, however, was that the so-called queen was, in fact, a young girl of delicate beauty. The girl's features were striking, with fair skin as pale as snow and a curvaceous figure beneath the white dress, showcasing her captivating silhouette. Her slender eyebrows carried a trace of vigor, and in her bright eyes, there was an air of authority. With every glance, she exuded a sense of dominance. But what truly astonished Chen wasn't her age or appearance. It was the fluctuating power emanating from her. It was on par with a Blood Demon General. She doesn't possess the cold aura typical of the Blood Fiend clan, Chen thought. So her strength must have been self-earned. However, her power doesn't seem fully refined. Some of it must come from external sources. Chen couldn't help but admire her. He knew all too well how rare such talent and opportunity were in this lower dimension. If he wasn't mistaken, this girl was probably the most powerful among the native inhabitants of this lower dimension. It seemed that, wherever one went, when a race faced extinction, there would always be extraordinary individuals who rose to answer the call, saving their people under the will of destiny. While Chen was lost in these thoughts, the girl in the white dress seated herself at the head of the hall. Her bright eyes gazed upon the kneeling girl, and in a gentle tone, she asked, "Could you please recount the events in Iron Blood City in detail?" The kneeling girl raised her head, her eyes filled with excitement as she looked at the calm, graceful queen. In a world where the Blood Fiend clan slaughtered the lives of the common people like pigs and dogs, this very person had stood up and, after much struggle, provided the humans with a final, safe haven. In such moments of danger and despair, countless people had come to see this girl as their last hope of salvation. "Your Majesty, everything we've said is true. A celestial lord has descended. His power is immense. Just one strike from him was enough to slay the Blood Demon King of Iron Blood City," the girl said, her voice rising with emotion. Her words echoed through the hall, unsurprisingly drawing astonished gasps from those present. Even the girl in white couldn't hide her surprise. She understood the strength of the Blood Demon Generals, and while she knew she could defeat them, achieving a one-strike kill was utterly impossible. "Huh? What celestial lord? You're all fooling yourselves." Suddenly, a cold laugh broke the tense atmosphere. Everyone turned to see an elderly man standing at the front of the hall. His face was dark and shadowed, and a smirk played at the corner of his mouth. I believe what we need to focus on now is not some so-called celestial lord, but how to deal with the fury of the Blood Fiend clan. The shadowed elder's voice was filled with malice as he swept his gaze over everyone. His eyes then locked onto the queen on the throne. This time, a blood demon general and several powerful members of the Blood Fiend clan have been killed. The Blood Fiend clan will certainly not let this slide. They will track down everyone involved. So, I suggest that your majesty hand over all those responsible and compensate 5 million lives to appease the anger of the Blood Fiend clan's leaders. If not, under their wrath, this last peaceful land will turn to ashes. Grand State Preceptor is right. We must act swiftly to calm the anger of the Blood Fiend clan's leaders. These people must be handed over, came the voices of 3 middle-aged men, echoing the elder's sentiment. However, in the depths of their eyes, a faint bloodlust stirred. Their voices reverberated in the hall, and the atmosphere grew tense. Many of the high-ranking officials' faces turned pale, their hands clenched into fists. However, they dared not speak out, knowing that these Grand State Preceptors not only held immense power, second only to the Queen, but were also closely tied to the Blood Fiend clan. Their strength was derived from the very clan they served. Your Majesty, please, don't. The young girl in the Grand Hall turned pale when she heard that these people intended to hand them back to the demons of the Blood Fiend clan. In a panic, she kowtowed before the Queen on the throne, her wailing voice echoing through the hall. On the throne, the white-robed Queen tightly clenched her jade-like hand, her fingertips digging into her palm, sending a sharp pain through her body. In the hall, a man in armor, his face ashen, could no longer hold back his roar. Grand State Preceptor, these people came from afar, believing we were their last hope. Now you're going to give them back to those demons? Is your heart made of stone? The Grand State Preceptor coldly glanced at him and sneered. I didn't expect the Grand General to be so passionate. But if this angers the Blood Fiend clan, will it be you, General, who will fight them? The armored general gritted his teeth and said, even if it means our destruction, it's better than living like this. Everyone thinks we stand here on our own strength, but we all know the truth. We send 500,000 of our people every year, treating them like cattle, handing them over to the demons of the Blood Fiend clan to be enslaved. Only by doing this can we survive. But do we really want to live in such humiliation? Rather than being drained year after year, it's better to give everything we have and fight the Blood Fiend clan to the death, even if it means extinction. By the end of his words, his eyes were bloodshot with rage, and the fury in the hall was palpable, causing many of the high-ranking officials to redden with emotion. The white-robed queen on the throne trembled slightly. Her fingertips had deeply pierced her palm, and blood dripped from them onto the floor. Many saw her as the savior of the world, but only she knew the truth. Her strength was not enough. The survival of the kingdom was not due to her power, but because the Blood Fiend clan did not want to destroy them completely. They needed a continuous supply of food. Each time they handed over millions of citizens, watching them being taken away by the bloodthirsty demons amid their desperate wails, she loathed her own helplessness. She had often wanted to perish with the Blood Fiend clan, but in the end, she knew that would mean no hope for anyone. Hidden in the void, Chen watched this scene and suddenly understood. No wonder this kingdom had managed to survive. It was because the Blood Fiend clan had allowed it. The kingdom, appearing to be the last bastion of hope, was in fact just a way to trade its people for a few more days of existence. How tragic, he thought with a sigh. At that moment, however, he saw the white-robed queen suddenly look up, her gaze directly focusing on the spot where he was hidden in the void. Her intense stare shocked Chen. After all, he had completely concealed himself in the void, and no one could detect him. How could she possibly sense his presence? As he was pondering, he saw the white-robed queen rise from her throne, her teeth biting her red lips. She then slightly bowed in his direction, her voice hoarse as she spoke. Sir, since you're here, please show yourself.